The foreign ministers of both Greenland and Denmark met with Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the White House today. This comes as President Trump is pushing to acquire Greenland. The foreign ministers spoke after the meeting, maintaining their position that Greenland is not for sale.
The president has made his view clear, and we have a different position. We, the Kingdom of Denmark, continue to believe that also the long-term security of Greenland can be ensured inside the current framework, the 1951 agreement on the defense of Greenland, as well as the NATO treaty. For us, ideas that would not respect territorial integrity of the Kingdom of Denmark and the right of self-determination of the Greenlandic people are, of course, totally unacceptable. And we therefore still have a fundamental disagreement, but we also agree to disagree. And therefore we will, however, continue to talk.
CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi joins us live from outside the White House this afternoon. Olivia, what are you hearing about the meeting with the foreign delegation?
Well, hi, Liz. It's great to see you. As you heard there from the foreign ministers, there is still a fundamental disagreement on how to approach the issue of Greenland. We've heard from the president on this matter just in the last hour about what he thinks should be done. The president is not ruling out taking Greenland through military force. Take a listen to what he had to say here, where he says he's pretty much keeping all options on the table as it relates to Greenland.
We have a very good relationship with Denmark, as you know, we'll see. But, you know, we're doing the Golden Dome, we're doing a lot of things, and we really need it. If we don't go in, Russia's going to go in, and China's going to go in. And there's not a thing that Denmark can do about it, but we can do everything about it.
Now, when he mentions the Golden Dome there, that's the first time we've really heard what the explanation is for why the U.S. would need Greenland militarily. The president says he needs it now to build his Golden Dome. That's that anti-aircraft missile system that he wants to build for any missiles or incoming fire coming into the U.S. And now he says he needs Greenland to accomplish that. And of course, their foreign ministers say that taking Greenland militarily is just really a non-starter for them. Even buying the country is something that they're not really willing to negotiate on. Tomorrow, those foreign ministers are expected to be on Capitol Hill, where they're going to meet with a bipartisan group of senators to discuss what is happening, what the administration has proposed, and what path really there is forward for the country that the president says he has made up his mind and is intent on taking.
Olivia, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff announced the launch of Phase 2 of the 20-point plan to end the conflict in Gaza. What does Phase 2 entail?
Well, Phase 2 is part of that peace plan that we heard earlier this year, last year rather. We are in 2026. But essentially it's moving what's going on in Gaza from ceasefire to demilitarization. That would require Hamas to be giving up their weapons. And in response as well to demilitarization, there's also an effort to establish a new system of governance inside Gaza. There's a national committee for the administration of Gaza that has been created as part of an effort to stand up a government there. So you have a demilitarization coupled with a creating of a government. This would also require Israel to pull back some of its troops that are in the region as well. So now you're starting to see the security structure really come into focus in this next phase. And this is the critical part that we're told about. The sources that I've spoken with inside the administration say it's easy, or not easy, but Phase 1 of having a ceasefire was really their first step. But Phase 2, this is the critical juncture in which, if they can actually get Hamas to give up their weapons and create a peaceful security structure inside Gaza, is the question that remains to be seen. So they say they're heading into Phase 2 of this. We'll be watching very closely to see any developments. Of course, the president next week is headed to Davos, Switzerland, where he will be meeting with people in the European groups as well, to perhaps talk about some of these issues.
Olivia Rinaldi, thank you so much.
Just a few hours before the president said all this, across the street in the old executive office building was the vice president and the secretary of state meeting with the foreign minister of Denmark and essentially the head of Greenland, or one of their representatives.
Yeah.
And that didn't go well either.
Well, I mean, in terms of the outcome in this press conference that was held, our allies in Denmark were trying to lower the temperature and very diplomatically say they didn't come to any agreements. They have a working group and they're going to agree to disagree. Why should you care about this? Well, I got to tell you, from European officials I've spoken to over the past few days, for Americans who dismiss this as just sort of tough talk from the president, it's not received that way by our closest of allies, who say this is yet another fracture in the relationship by speaking so aggressively about an ally, repeatedly so. And in that meeting, the Danish officials were walking in hoping to hear that the president wasn't serious about establishing political control, that maybe he really was just trying to negotiate up an extension of the U.S. military presence that's already in Greenland. And I didn't hear those officials come out and say, we have been reassured that this was really just about a negotiation.
No, it seemed pretty tenuous.
The president told the New York Times that he needs ownership, not a lease, for psychological reasons.
Yeah. So again, that one, working groups are a signal. It's far from over, and we'll keep talking.
Exactly. We're gonna push off a decision here.
I also want to ask you about Greenland. Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with the foreign ministers from Greenland and Denmark today. And the officials say they have fundamental differences with the U.S. over the future of the island. How do you see NATO navigating this?
Yeah, well, look, I just wrote a report on the 250-year birthday of the United States of America. When you look at the really big picture in the long run, the spread of the United States across North America, both in terms of territory and influence, is an inexorable process. So even as much as it's a surprise that Greenland is coming up in this way, and the administration has been very hurtful toward the allies and its rhetoric, a purchase is something that can be negotiated, and it would have to pass Congress, and the president only has a one-seat majority for his party in Congress. So the Danes might be willing to negotiate, and they might seek to prolong that negotiation until a future administration, and then maybe American fervor would sort of subside. But over the long run, it is the case that the U.S. expands its influence. But I would say that if the U.S. seizes the territory using its de facto military superiority, then that would be a death knell for NATO, because it would shatter the faith in the alliance and it would force the Europeans to provide for their own security.
Matt Gertken, thank you.
I mean, this is not new. He talked about it in his first term, and he's not the first U.S. president that has examined or looked at how could we acquire Greenland. There's an interest there. But so I just reminded them of the fact that not only did Truman want to do it, but President Trump's been talking about this since his first term.
That was Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking to reporters about the U.S. potentially buying Greenland. Rubio is expected to meet with leaders of Denmark next week to discuss a U.S. deal for the territory. Despite them repeatedly saying Greenland is not for sale, Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. With this in mind, we wanted to examine some of the past attempts, which started all the way back in 1886. U.S. Secretary of State William Stuart, the man who negotiated Alaska's purchase from the Russian Empire, investigated this, but the U.S. never formally asked. In 1910, the U.S. made an offer to the Danish government to trade territories. The U.S. would give Denmark 2 islands from the Philippines in exchange for Greenland and what was then known as the Danish West Indies. That deal, which also involved a secondary trade with Germany, fell apart. After World War II, Greenland became a critical location for U.S. military bases. So the U.S. again tried to buy Greenland from Denmark. President Truman's Secretary of State secretly offered Denmark $100 million in gold in exchange for the island. Denmark didn't take the money or give up sovereignty over the territory, but allowed the U.S. to keep its military bases there. So what would Greenland's value to the U.S. be now? White House officials have said its location off Canada's northeastern coast makes it critical for defending the U.S. and NATO allies. Greenland also sits in the middle of a crucial North Atlantic shipping route, which means any disruptions there or biases toward Russia or China could disrupt global trade operations. And Greenland has large deposits of rare earth minerals needed to make cell phones and solar panels.
All right, I want to bring in Max Bergmann, the director of the Europe, Russia, and Eurasia program, and Stuart Center at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Max, thanks so much for being with us. The Trump administration is trying to make a case that, in addition to Venezuela, the U.S. should control Greenland. We've talked a lot about the benefits of this, including security, natural resources, and shipping lanes. But is there a bigger picture here to this when it comes to China and Russia, as we just were talking about, when it comes to oil tankers that were connected to Russia from Venezuela?
Yeah, well, there's increasing focus on the Arctic and Arctic security, partly due to the effects of climate change, where there is now an ability to sail through the Arctic to use it as a northern sea route some parts of the year. That's mainly along the Russian coastline. But you do see an uptick in Russian activity in the Arctic as well as Chinese activity in the Arctic. So there has been a focus on the Arctic, a growing focus on the Arctic here in Washington, including during the Biden administration. So it's not as if this is sort of coming out of nowhere. What is kind of coming out of nowhere is the need for the United States to actually physically, territorially possess Greenland. That is a real head scratcher, considering we can essentially do whatever we want militarily in Greenland. We used to have 15,000 troops there during the Cold War. Now we have 150. The Danes, Denmark, which controls Greenland, it is Danish sovereign territory, have said, what do you want? Do you want to put more troops there? And we haven't really responded to that. So it's kind of a head scratcher why we're trying to possess it. And that is causing a lot of angst in Europe, and especially in Denmark and within the NATO alliance.
Yeah, I mean, let's lean into that. NATO allies in Europe, as you said, standing firm in support of Greenland and Denmark's control of Greenland. The Danish Prime Minister even warned it could lead to the demise of the NATO alliance. What do you believe could happen if the U.S. takes over Greenland?
Well, I think she's right. Look, I think what the Trump administration is trying to do is to buy Greenland. As an American taxpayer, I think this would be a big waste of money. Right now, Denmark is paying for the health care of the Greenlanders. It's roughly $500 million a year. We have a great deal right now where we can do what we want militarily, and the health and well-being of the citizens of Greenland are taken care of by the Europeans, by Denmark. And now that burden would be on the American taxpayer. But if we're trying to buy Greenland, Denmark is going to say no. And then now there are threats from the United States that we would seize Greenland militarily, which is something that we could do. We have the military power to do that. But if we did that, if we attacked effectively a NATO ally, and Denmark is a NATO ally, they fought and died in Afghanistan, it would, I think, mean the end of NATO. There is simply no way that NATO could continue. And I think it would likely mean a huge rupture in U.S.-EU economic relations, which would cause real impacts on the stock market, real impacts on U.S. tech companies that do a ton of business in Europe and are lightly taxed. I think there would be all sorts of downstream ramifications. It would essentially turn the grand alliance between U.S. and Europe, it would break it apart, and it would turn Europe into an adversary of the United States. And I don't think that's what we want, and that would come at huge costs, I think, to the U.S. economically and to U.S. security as well.
And I'm curious, what do Greenlanders think of all of this? I mean, it's the world's least densely populated country. Do they want to be controlled by the U.S.? Is there a level of resistance there on the ground?
There's extreme resistance to it. They actually had an election last year, so after the talk of this had sort of already started, and they elected a government that is very much opposed to joining the United States for the status quo. That prime minister has gone to the European Union, spoken at the European Union Parliament, and to be clear, Greenland does not want to be part of the United States. I think the polling is about 85% against that. There is a strong movement for independence from Denmark. And that is, I think, also not in U.S. interest, because then Greenland would be free to do whatever it wanted in terms of deals with China and other places. So the current status quo of Greenland being part of Denmark, they have representation in the Danish parliament, for instance, Denmark paying their health care bills and things like that, while the U.S. has free reign militarily, I think is a really good situation that we don't want to upset. And right now we are upsetting it. And so it remains to be seen how this progresses over the next few months.
Max Bergmann, thank you so much. Always great to see you.
Welcome back to The Takeout. The White House says it is remaining open to what it considers numerous options to acquire Greenland. Here was Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt earlier today when asked about a potential, maybe cash offer.
Well, that's something that's currently being actively discussed by the president and his national security team. And I would point out that the acquisition of Greenland by the United States is not a new idea. This is something that presidents dating back to the 1800s have said is advantageous for America's national security.
Retired Army General and former CIA Director David Petraeus joins me now. He also served as head of Central Command. David, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. The press secretary is correct. It's not a new idea. It's not a new idea, Greenland and its potential security meaning to the United States, but this is a new set of methods in discussing how it might be acquired.
Well, look, President Trump has used a variety of different methods over the years, often different than his predecessors. And in fact, he's often gotten results with those methods, such as getting Europeans to finally spend much more on defense than they had been as a percentage of GDP. He's in a moment where there's real leverage coming out of this extraordinary demonstration of American military capability, this operation to bring Maduro and his wife to justice, not even losing a soldier or an aircraft, despite what are now, we're learning, some very considerable gunfights, including over 30 Cuban Secret Service members around Maduro alone. So there's a moment he uses all of his leverage. Let's go back to his own words, Art of the Deal, where he says you should use every tool that you have, flex your muscles before you sit down. In fact, before you sit at the table, punch the other guy in the nose. So these are unconventional means. It's using the leverage that we have. One will hope that obviously there's listening to those on the Hill, such as Senator McConnell and others, talking about the vital importance of NATO. Obviously, Denmark controls the Greenland territory. NATO member, we have a base in Greenland. If we want more facilities or infrastructure, I'm sure that Denmark would be happy to negotiate that with us. If it's that we need more of the strategic minerals and rare earths, again, I'm sure that they're open for discussion on that. And we have a lot more influence right now, a lot more leverage, I think, to get what it is that we presumably want. Although I think some of the notions thrown out there are more for the leverage effect than they are for real strategy going forward.
Would you put the threat of military occupation or landing in Greenland in that category?
I put that likelihood pretty low.
I like to diffuse the conversation that it's not a nutty idea that there are very contemporary, meaning here and now, security interests in Greenland. And as climate change changes the navigability around the Arctic,
very much so. Yep.
These are legitimate issues. But how would you rank
These are
them,
very
David?
legitimate issues.
How would you rank them? How do we think about, how should we think about the idea that there are some number of Russian vessels, some number of Chinese vessels in and around Greenland? Is that near the top? Is it 10th, 20th? How should we think about that?
No, it is a big concern. And at a time when, as you note, because of climate change, the polar ice cap is melting. On Greenland itself, the ice is melting, and it's exposing more strategic minerals and rare earths. So with each passing year, it becomes of greater geostrategic importance. And again, I'm sure that Denmark is open to discussing together with the leadership in Greenland what it is that we are seeking to achieve and how that might be done.
David Petraeus, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Good to be with you, Major. Thank you.
European leaders are pushing back against the U.S. after White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller said Greenland should be part of the United States. The semi-autonomous island has been the territory of Denmark, a NATO nation, for 300 years. Following U.S. action in Venezuela, President Trump and members of his administration have renewed calls for the U.S. to control Greenland for defense and security needs. Today, the White House confirmed it is discussing options to acquire Greenland, including taking it by force. The leaders of Greenland and Denmark and other European nations have soundly rejected the Trump administration's stance, warning that a U.S. takeover would amount to an attack on NATO. Joining me now to discuss is Heather Conley. She is a former State Department official and currently a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you so much for talking about this with us. Remind us why the U.S. wants Greenland.
Well, I think President Trump, as a real estate professional, must be very interested and fascinated with acquiring the world's largest island. The United States doesn't need to acquire Greenland. We have a strong relationship with a great ally, the Kingdom of Denmark, who has opened their doors to allow us, with the Greenlandic government, to increase our military posture in Greenland, to increase our economic position in Greenland. But those have all been pushed aside for this very focused effort on so-called buying or acquiring Greenland. And the Greenlandic government and the Danish government have made very clear this is not for sale, and it is for the 57,000 Greenlanders to decide their future. And they've been clear they do not want to be part of the United States.
What would taking Greenland mean for our relationship with NATO?
Well, it would be absolutely devastating. And this is why you're now seeing European leaders who, quite frankly, whether it was through the U.S. military operation to seize President Maduro, they've been quite quiet on this front because they are so focused on maintaining a strong American security presence in Europe, particularly against an aggressive Russia and continuing American support for Ukraine. But on this issue, they understand this is the United States attacking another NATO European ally, with saying that all options are on the table, meaning economic coercion, potentially military strikes, that this would end the 80-year-old alliance as we know it. So they've been very, very forthcoming. Again, all of this is so unnecessary. The United States has a defense agreement with the government of Denmark. We have a base on Greenland that provides that early warning radar against potential missile threat against North America. We don't have to acquire it. We have a strong ally, but our ally, Denmark and Greenland, now believe that we are the aggressor and are preparing for potential options of what the United States will do. I simply don't know what it looks like in coming days, but this is just completely unnecessary.
So if it's not about security, is it about resources? Greenland has reserves of oil, natural gas, and mineral resources.
Well, certainly, yes. Greenland has enormous critical mineral wealth. But again, U.S. companies could be investing in there right now, and we just don't see much evidence of that. There were, certainly believed oil and gas resources off the coast of Greenland, but early exploration of that wasn't very promising. Again, if the United States wants to deepen its military and its economic relationship with Greenland, it can do so today. It does not need to acquire it. It just needs to work closely with its ally.
Heather Conley, thank you.